And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is November 25th, 329th day of the year. This 36 days remain of the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays observances. Shopping reminder day. Get a head start on that shopping list. National Parfait Day, a delicious layered dessert, a treat for your taste buds. National Natural Fiber Day, National Play Day with Dad. Gazpacho Soup Day, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Blasé Day, unleash that carefree spirit. Embrace a nonchalant attitude. Statehood Day in Bosnia and Herzegovina. National Bible Week, National Book Week, National Tree Week. Go out and plant a tree with a friend. And it's Artes Monday, National Game and Puzzle Week, National Farm City Week, and Better Conversations Week. Famous people born on this date: John F. Kennedy Jr., Christina Applegate, and Andrew Carnegie. Well, having said all that, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on, especially this time of year. There's a University of Minnesota site warns of a whiteness pandemic, urges white parents to re-educate. This website belongs to the Culture and Family Lab at Minnesota Flagship University. Hosts a webpage warning against the whiteness pandemic that provides resources on how to halt and reverse the issue. It said if you were born and raised in the U.S., you've grown up in the whiteness pandemic, and you can play a role in halting and reversing it, especially if you're white, because of the power and privilege you hold in this racialized society. You know, quite frankly, it looks to me like whoever wrote this was smoking those left-handed cigarettes. Been white all my life, and I haven't seen any privilege. Well, Greta Thunberg has been fined and banned from Venice after Extinction Rebellion dies the Grand Canal Green. She just can't stay out of trouble. Climate activist Greta Thunberg's been slapped with a 48-hour ban from entering Venice after joining Extinction Rebellion protest and dyeing the Grand Canal bright green, according to all reports. The Swedish activist, who's 22, is also fined $172, along with roughly 35 other demonstrators involved in the action. That's according to the Telegraph. Extinction Rebellion said the dye used was a fluorescent, non-toxic tracer commonly employed in environmental studies, such as tracking water flows or monitoring leaks. The group reportedly insisted the dye posed no ecological threat. They argued the stunt was designed to draw attention to the massive effects of climate collapse and claimed that Venice was among Europe's most vulnerable cities due to rising sea levels and increasingly frequent flooding. You know, she needs to go home and figure out what she's going to do with her life beside annoy the rest of us. Well, Ruben Gallego warns the military there will be consequences going after Congress members once President Trump is out of office. Senator Ruben Gallego, Democrat of Arizona, warned the military members Monday there will be consequences if they allowed Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat of Arizona, to be court-martialed. Gallego reacted to the Department of War's announcement earlier on X that it launched a formal review into allegations of misconduct against Kelly. He's a retired Navy captain, and the review is going to be over his role in a controversial video urging service members to refuse illegal orders from President Trump. Gallego told CNN's Casey Hunt he has faith in the military and the justice system to handle the case properly, adding the officers know there would be a fallout if they tried to railroad Kelly. He said President Trump's going to be gone in a couple of years. If you're part of the military that's going after sitting senators, sitting members of Congress, and part of the weaponization of government, there will be consequences without a doubt. Going to threaten people much? Well, Democrats are moving to set limits on President Trump's donor-funded White House ballroom, claiming bribery is in plain sight. They're seeking to put limits on private donations that he's gathering to foot the bill for the new White House ballroom amid what they say are bribery concerns. President Trump announced in October construction started on the ballroom, leading to the demolition of the White House's historic East Wing, and be privately funded at an estimated cost of $300 million. That was up from $200 million that was estimated in July when the project was unveiled. But Democrats are concerned that the donors, including individuals and companies and other organizations, are footing the bill for the project because they're seeking something in return from the Trump administration, and they recently introduced legislation to try to curb it. Although the White House released a list of donors in October, Democrats, including Senators Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, that's Pocahontas, don't you know, and Adam Schiff of California, that's Pencil Neck, claimed an additional oversight's needed and that the White House hadn't identified all the donors. Others have been granted anonymity. Well, Guy Fieri says a quad exploded mid-shoot, keeping him in a wheelchair for 8 weeks. He was rushed to emergency surgery after missing a set of steps and tearing his quad muscles in half. During an interview with Fox News Digital, the Food Network star explained he's currently in a wheelchair and using crutches. He said, I slipped down a set of stairs and one foot went forward, the other foot caught on the threshold. So, it extended me out. Looked like I was trying to do the splits, but when my right leg compressed onto itself, the giveaway point, doctor said he's never seen, in 20 years, he hadn't seen a tear in the biggest, thickest part of your quad. He said it really sucked. Said he was rushed to the surgery after the fall to ensure his muscle didn't recede. Well, if he'd eat less, he wouldn't be as heavy, don't you know? Well, Meghan Markle's been accused of clinging to the royal title after a recent interview. She's said to be holding on to her Duchess title despite previously airing her struggles with a royal life. Several royal experts said they were stunned to learn the Duchess of Sussex allegedly had a staffer formally announce her by her royal title before a Harper's Bazaar cover interview. According to experts, that move shows how tightly the 44-year-old is holding on to the prestige of her royal status, despite having stepped away from the monarchy years ago. He said, this is not protocol, let alone royal protocol. It's bizarre and highlights that Meghan attaches enormous importance to her royal status. She will cling to her Duchess of Sussex title because it gives her a sense of importance. Title remains useful for Meghan's business activities, particularly in the U.S. Gets people talking and keeps her in the limelight, which is basically what she's trying to do. She was one of the reasons she was strutting through Europe was she was a star. Well, she hadn't been in front of the camera in quite some time. Well, Campbell Soup executive allegedly calls the company's products S for Poor People in a secret recording. Martin Bali, placed on temporary leave as company conducts internal investigations into the lawsuit. Allegations and accusations are made, making their rounds after a Campbell Soup Company executive allegedly made disparaging remarks concerning the company's customers and employees. He was secretly recorded during a meeting, according to a lawsuit filed in Michigan's Wayne County Circuit Court. That suit was filed by Robert Garza, former cybersecurity analyst for Campbell Soup, accuses Martin Baldy, the company's vice president and chief information security officer, of making the offensive comments during a meeting in November 2024. Garza recorded the conversation, which he said took place in the company's headquarters in Camden, New Jersey. In the recording, a voice alleged to be Bailey's can be heard criticizing Campbell's products and mocking its customers. He said, we have S for effing poor people. Who buys our S? He says, I don't buy Campbell's products barely anymore. Bioengineered meat? I don't want to eat a piece of chicken that came from a 3D printer. He said, belittling Campbell's soup ingredients. Well, I grew up on Campbell's soup. I got no problem with it. Well, a hugely exciting ring was found in the English countryside. May have a link to the infamous plot, and it's now heading to auction. This historic gold ring from the English countryside is going to the hammer this month. Experts believe it may be linked to one of the most famous or infamous conspiracies in British history. This piece of jewelry was uncovered by metal detectorist Andrew Rose, who found it 6 inches in the ground at Bushwood, Warwickshire, about 20 miles southeast of Birmingham. The artifact features an inscription that says, "Your friend indeed," a message thought to symbolize loyalty. 16th century band may be tied to the 1605 gunpowder plot, attempt by English Catholics to blow up the House of Parliament and kill King James I. James I's court got wind of the plans, eventually located Guy Fawkes hiding among 36 barrels of gunpowder on November 5th. They foiled the plot. I know the plot's remembered through Fawkes, and the rhyme remember the 5th of November. The mastermind behind the scheme was actually Robert Catesby. Rose found the ring near Bushwood Hall, where Catesby was born, according to a news agency. The hall was also used as a hideout and weapons storage facility for the conspirators. Well, U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has a message for Americans. Stop wearing your pajamas on airplanes. While speaking at Newark Airport in New Jersey on Monday, he said he had noticed a degradation of civility among air travelers and launched what he called a civility campaign to encourage courtesy and patience among the crush of holiday travel. He encouraged travelers to say please and thank you to the pilots and to the flight attendants and dress with some respect. You know, whether it's a pair of jeans and a decent shirt, I'd encourage people to maybe dress a little bit better, which encourages us to behave a little bit better. Let's try not to wear slippers and pajamas as we come to the airport. That's a positive step. He also encouraged passengers to help other passengers who are struggling to put their bags in the overhead bins as a common courtesy and civility. Of course, that coming from a man who flies private. President Trump administration's ending temporary protected status for Burmese migrants. They ended it yesterday. They're deeming conditions in that country have improved enough for citizens to return home safely. That decision restores temporary protective status to its original status as only temporary, according to Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Burma's had made notable progress in governance and stability, including the end of its state of emergency, plans for free and fair elections, successful ceasefire agreements, and improved local governments, contributing to enhanced public service delivery and national reconciliation. Burma is also known as Myanmar, was first designated for temporary protective status in May of 2021 by then Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. In March of 2024, Mayorkas extended temporary protective status for Burma for 18 months, making the expiration date today, November 25th, 2025. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service said in its announcement the designation will end January 26, 2026. It noted that Noem came to that decision after conferring with interagency partners, and she further determined that permitting Burmese nationals to remain temporarily in the U.S. is contrary to the national interest of the U.S. It was also said that Burmese nationals are encouraged to use the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Home app, which is designed for self-deportations. In other words, don't let the doorknob hit you on the way out. Well, Julie Crisley weighs in on Ghislaine Maxwell's concierge-style prison treatment claims. She's weighing in on reports that Ghislaine Maxwell is getting a special treatment in prison after her own time behind bars. 52-year-old former reality star was incarcerated for 28 months at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, while Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker and accomplice to Jeffrey Epstein, is serving a 20-year sentence at the federal prison camp Bryan in Texas. It's a minimum security prison camp where she was transferred in August. Earlier this month, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee revealed that a whistleblower claimed that Maxwell, who's 63, was getting concierge-style treatment, including after-hours permission to use the exercise area, customized meals, time to spend with puppies, being trained to become service dogs, and more. In addition, sources told CNN, that bastion of truth, don't you know, that Maxwell's been given access to an unlimited supply of toilet paper while her fellow inmates only get 2 rolls a week, often have to pay for extra to avoid running out. Julie and her husband Todd recently sat down for an interview with Fox News, during which she expressed skepticism over the claims of Maxwell's special treatment. She said, "I really don't give a lot of credence to those things. The toilet paper, definitely. I've witnessed it. I've been there. I've seen how, I know how it can be a situation. So if she gets all the toilet paper she wants, she's grateful for that. Want all women to get as much toilet paper as they need. You know, these are crazy stories that when we went in, that I was getting meals and special lobster and steak. I never got one bite or a morsel of outside food, so I just take it with a grain of salt, as everybody should. They were television stars, don't you know?" Well, according to a new news break, Ukraine has agreed to a peace deal. And in another story, college freshman died after fraternity hazing led to horrific abuse, according to his family. It was a Texas college freshman. That families filed a wrongful death lawsuit stemming from allegations that fraternity hazing drove him into a mental health crisis that led him to take his own life. And I remember some of the craziness that went on when I was in college. Sawyer Updike, an 18-year-old from Pearland, accepted a bid to pledge the Sigma Chi fraternity through the University of Texas at Austin's Alpha Nu chapter in August of 2023. Throughout his time as a member of that chapter's pledge class, he was allegedly subjected to months of horrific hazing that ultimately led him to commit suicide. According to Ted Lyon, an attorney representing his family, this was just an outstanding young man. Scored 1410 on the SATs. He was a straight-A student in high school. 6'6" freshman, had just made the school's skeet shooting team and had the whole world ahead of him. The hazing took place at the Alpha Nu fraternity house in Austin, according to Lyon. Culture that uses this type of, I'll call it depraved activity, is not the kind of culture any major university ought to condone. I know when I was in college, and I've got 5 degrees, and that and 50 cents to get me a cup of coffee, I saw a lot of hazing that went on. According to Ramaswamy, the Republican Party needs to be pro-capitalist, and his allegations that it's actually not. Well, there's an OnlyFans star that preaches to university students. As the professor says, manifestation has worked. University of Washington professor invited social media personality and OnlyFans star Ari Krishya speak to her students last week. The decision was defended by both the professor and university in statements to Fox News. Dr. Nicole McNichols teaches Psych 210, the diversity of human sexuality at the university, and noted the adult content personality understandably sparks mixed reactions in her Instagram post touching on the visit, which took place November 17th. According to McNichols, her manifestation worked. Yesterday, my class had the chance to hear from the Ari Kritsha, somebody who understandably sparks mixed reactions, and whose voice and lived experience are essential to any honest conversation about sexuality, labor, and realities of today's digital landscape. Much of that commercial porn still portrays women in unrealistic, scripted, and at times even non-consensual scenarios, according to McNichols. OnlyFans, by contrast, often features real people with real bodies creating content of their own on their own terms. Millions of people are going to receive a white Christmas thanks to the powerful lake effect snowstorm that's going to sweep across the Great Lakes in the Midwest and the Northeast. Well, travel experts are sharing tips for record high Thanksgiving air travel, and there's been warnings about a multiple of delays. I remember years ago, my most interesting trip fist fight broke out in the airport. Well, the Democratic House candidate's luxurious lifestyle clashes with working class campaign message, according to experts. Iowa Democratic Christina Bohannon built her campaign for Congress around the image of a hardworking middle-class advocate who understands what it's like to struggle to put food on the table. But her real estate portfolio and financial disclosures paint a very different picture. One of the expensive homes and a Florida waterfront condo and lucrative stock investments that put her among the wealthy elite she claims to want to fight against, the very group she wants to fight against in Congress. She said, I know what it's like to work so hard and still struggle to put food on the table, she said. In fact, she said that to a crowd at the Iowa State Fair. And throughout her multiple campaigns, she's run for the same seat in the House for the past 2 elections and lost. She's touted her history to grow up in a trailer park and be forced to choose between putting groceries in the cart and filling prescriptions. In an interview at Iowa Public Radio, she reportedly reiterated once again she knows what it's like to struggle. I doubt that. Well, the teen found dead on the Carnival cruise ship died from mechanical asphyxiation, and it's been ruled a homicide. Her mysterious death on board a Carnival cruise ship was a homicide by mechanical asphyxiation, according to a new report. The 18-year-old was found dead aboard the Carnival Horizon November 7th at 11:15 a.m. Mechanical asphyxiation means there's something external to the body that hinders her breathing. Her chest or belly can't expand, according to board-certified forensic pathologist. Miami-Dade medical examiner's office declined comment, citing the ongoing investigation. Her death was ruled a homicide. She was mechanically asphyxiated by the person or persons unknown, according to the ABC News. Although her time of death is listed as 11:17 a.m. on November 7th, the report said she suffered her fatal injury on the night of November 6th, the last night she was publicly seen alive. Well, aggressive cancer warning signs revealed after JFK's granddaughter had her diagnosis. October was Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And days after Tatiana Schlossberg announced she has terminal cancer, the spotlight's on the warning signs of acute myeloid leukemia. She's John F. Kennedy's granddaughter. She's 35. Shared the details of her diagnosis in an essay published in the New Yorker. She's the daughter of Kennedy's daughter, Carolyn Kennedy, and Edwin Schlossberg. Learned about her disease in May of 2024. Wrote one doctor predicted she'd live for about another year. First indicator of her disease was a normally high white blood cell count, which doctors detected just hours after she gave birth to her second child. Well, temple staff were stunned to hear knocking from inside a coffin brought in for a cremation. A 65-year-old Thai woman believed to be dead stunned the temple staff in Bangkok when they heard a faint knocking from inside her coffin after her brother brought her in for cremation. Parat Sudthrup, General Financial Affairs Manager at the Wat Rat Phang Kong Temple, told the Associated Press Monday he was discussing cremation with the woman's brother when they heard noise coming from inside her coffin. According to the official, I was a bit surprised, so I asked him to open the coffin. Everybody was startled. She opened her eyes slightly and knocked on the side of the coffin. She'd been knocking for quite some time, apparently. The Buddhist temple in Nonthaburi province outside of Bangkok posted a Facebook video showing a woman in a white coffin in the back of a pickup truck, moving her arms and head. Staff was stunned, of course. Parat said the woman's brother had driven her from one of the provinces to be cremated. Lucky he didn't do it there. Well, James Comey expects further legal scrutiny from the Trump administration. He criticizes the fools who would frighten us, even though he was part of the same group when he was in power. All right. Yesterday, we started talking about the Kennedy assassination. The anniversary was this past Saturday, 62 years. A lot of attention, and apparently not enough attention, has been focused on Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin. He moved from New Orleans to Dallas over the weekend of September 27th, 1963. The Warren Commission said he made a trip to Mexico City, met with the Cuban consul, and visited the Soviet embassy requesting visas to Cuba and the Soviet Union. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that there were Oswald doubles running around, and the whole thing may have been a major setup to blame him for the assassination of President Kennedy. And as we touched on yesterday, a lot of people believe the whole thing was orchestrated by Lyndon B. Johnson. And certainly, during the motorcade, right before the shots were fired, he scrunched down in the seat so his head was not above the edge of the door, which shows that he, if in fact that was true, and I've got a lot of information that says that it is, that does show that he was aware something was going to happen. Well, there's only one flaw to all the finger pointing about Oswald being at the Cuban and Soviet embassy. There's none of the entries or exits was actually captured on film that showed the real Oswald. Now, the Warren Commission made much of the fact that Oswald was said to be officious and demanded his request be honored. They said he actually appeared desperate, hammering his fist on the table. One story even said Oswald showed the Soviet consul a loaded pistol, and the Soviet officer promptly took the bullets out and gave the gun back to him. Oswald said to have met with Comrade Kostakov while he was in the Soviet embassy. Well, from the conspiracist point of view, this story is improbable to the extreme. It requires, we believe, the real Oswald traveled to Mexico City 3 weeks before his wife was delivered their second child and smuggled a loaded weapon into Mexico. And that's very hard to do these days. Carrying concealed weapons is absolutely illegal in a country of Mexico. And then successfully smuggled that gun back to the United States through American customs without incident, all in time for the birth of his child, Rachel, and all in time to use the same revolver to kill Officer Tippit. Well, the mainstream narrative stretches the imagination to its breaking point, frankly. There's a lot of evidence dug up by researchers over the last 50 years showing that story is fictional. They believed Oswald was represented by a doppelganger, and the imposter's function was to leave a very clear impression Oswald was decidedly pro-communist and pro-Cuban. That the intent of this performance was it was created in New Orleans, and it was also the image crafted in Mexico City. The idea of an imposter is not merely the stuff of conspiracy theory. It's also the conclusion of a still secret report of a congressional committee called upon to investigate the incident called the Lopez Report. There's another damaging critique to consider over the Warren Commission's Mexico City performance. The real Lee Harvey Oswald joined two anti-Castro Cubans and visited Sylvia and Annie Odio in Dallas on the same weekend he was supposed to be traveling in Mexico City. There's excellent evidence that he did, in fact, visit the Odio sisters. In other words, the real Oswald was never in Mexico City. Now, the Odio sisters were anti-Castro Cubans who were liberals, so to speak. Their father had been imprisoned by Castro. And Oswald came to the door with his two anti-Castro Cuban buddies who introduced himself as Leopoldo and Angelo. Oswald introduced himself as Leon Oswald. Well, his visit to Sylvia Odio was orchestrated to prove to Oswald he was generally involved in an anti-Castro operation. The two visitors, Leopoldo and Angelo, were actually anti-Castro Cubans, Bernardo de Torres and Angelo Mergado. In fact, Oswald himself was being, pranked is the best word, that he was involved in an actual anti-Castro operation. When Oswald was introduced to Odio, the three gentlemen only discussed Castro and Cuba. The day after the visit, though, Leopoldo called Odio back to mention that Oswald was a sharpshooter. A loose cannon might even shoot President Kennedy. They planted that seedling on the phone, not in Oswald's presence, so Oswald would continue to think he's involved in an anti-Castro scheme without having any idea it was actually being set up as the patsy for the assassination of the U.S. president. And by that date, the plan for the president to visit Dallas was already agreed on and in the works. Well, Sylvia and her sister didn't know any of these people, and they wrote to their father in Cuba, and he said he didn't know them either, and they should avoid these mysterious men. After the assassination, Sylvia recognized Lee Harvey Oswald as the Leon Oswald she had met weeks earlier. According to reports, she fainted. She was afraid. She didn't tell a soul and finally confided to a friend. Months after the assassination, she was visited by Oswald. Her friend, of course, told the FBI. The FBI investigated the story. It was critical evidence because it meant that Oswald was in Odio's apartment in Dallas that weekend, not in Mexico City. And suddenly an anti-Castro mercenary named Loran Hall came forward and said he was the one that visited Sylvia and her sister, not Oswald. And as I said yesterday, Hall had links to both the Mafia, the anti-Castro movement, and the CIA. Well, Sylvia, for her part, disagreed and said she never saw or met Loran Hall in her life. Her sister Annie said the same thing. But the FBI, of course, in its infinite wisdom, was more than happy to accept Hall's testimony and dropped the story of the Odio sisters from the Warren Commission report entirely. They had their victim, so to speak, and they weren't going to let go. Well, many years later, testifying before a congressional committee investigating the assassination, Hall was called to testify about this incident. He agreed to testify only if he was granted immunity from prosecution. And he was. At that point in time, he said he had lied to the Warren Commission and he had never met Sylvia Odio. So if the Mexico City story is false, then it was clearly concocted by the conspirators themselves. Well, present-day researchers believe the person responsible for the Mexico City ruse was CIA's David Atlee Phillips. But under rigorous questioning by the House Select Committee on Assassination in the 1970s, investigator Tannenbaum asked Phillips what happened to the photos and tapes of Oswald in Mexico. At that point, Phillips started getting confused and his testimony became increasingly inconsistent. He said when he told us the photographs were gone, I told him, well, the bottom line is there are 3 people in this room who know you just lied. Detective Fenton, me, and you. Then I had Cliff hand him a copy of the FBI memo. He read the memo and he just folds it up and leaves the room. Tannenbaum wanted to drag the former CIA official back for another round of questioning, and he said he's in contempt and committed perjury, but the committee wouldn't bring him back, and the inquiry just ended. Sounds like somebody high up had given the orders. Curiously, Phillips, when confronted with his deceit, simply got up and walked out of the hearing. Strange as it may seem, there were no indications or indictments or prosecutions that followed this hearing. So apparently it's okay to be rude to a congressional committee, if you're CIA, that is. Well, Oswald was recommended to apply for a job at the book depository by Ruth Payne. Started his job there October 16th, 5 weeks before the assassination. And between 2 and 4 weeks before the parade route was finalized. Well, at least publicly finalized. Early planning for the motorcade started on November 4th when the final route was determined November 18th. This has led to a lot of folks to say, including commissions studying the issue, that Oswald was not deliberately placed in a depository because his employment there occurred before the parade route was fixed. Well, in actuality, the decision for Kennedy to travel to Dallas was actually made in late September. And the plan for him to speak at the International Trade Mart occurred sometime between September 30th and November 4th. And speaking at the Trade Mart would have taken Kennedy past the depository, not necessarily directly in front of it, but certainly past it. The final route, where the motorcade would veer sharply and slow to a crawl in front of the depository, can't be rationalized to have occurred prior to November 4th, and at that point in time, Oswald was already working there. Warren Commission proponents point to this fact with some pride, and it means to them there was no conspiracy to put Oswald in place. In fact, the only way you can weave, or the only story you can weave, to prove a conspiracy around Oswald's placement in the depository suggests that the parade route was determined because of Oswald's location, not that Oswald's location was determined because of any pre-existing parade route, because there wasn't any at that point in time. And this thought seems to have eluded many conspiracy researchers, Warren Commission advocates alike. Right after the Parade route was determined, the conspirators began planning their triangulated crossfire attack on the president. Now, at this point, you need to look at some background information. First, you need to find out how Oswald was so successfully put in the depository and the actual route still hadn't been fixed. Well, the story about that comes from George de Mohrenschildt, Russian immigrant who befriended Oswald and his wife Marina. At the time of the Warren Commission investigation, de Mohrenschildt was simply thought to be a family friend who enjoyed speaking Russian with the Oswald. Well, subsequent research has actually shown that de Mohrenschildt had a CIA contact, Dalton Moore, who had asked him to befriend Oswald. De Mohrenschildt himself said he would never have made friends with Oswald in a million years. He considered him a hillbilly. In other words, de Mohrenschildt had a CIA controller who told him what to do. De Mohrenschildt then left for Haiti on a work contract and appears to have introduced the Oswald to Ruth Paine around that time. Well, again, the Warren Commission took the position that the Paines were merely good Samaritans who helped Marina Oswald during her pregnancy. Marina actually moved into their home after a spat and separation from Lee. Originally, Ruth Paine denied she knew de Mohrenschildt, but later admitted it she did. When intrepid Jim Garrison questioned her on this point in front of a grand jury, she admitted that she and her husband Michael were dinner guests at de Mohrenschildt's house in 1966, 3 years after the assassination. However, these and there are other sources that suggest de Mohrenschildt introduced Paine to the Oswalds before that time. The question then seems to be, why did it appear that Ruth was trying to conceal the true nature of her relationship with George de Mohrenschildt? In the many years that had passed, researchers uncovered a lot of disturbing facts, most notable among them that Ruth Paine's sister actually worked for the CIA. In fact, after the assassination, Marina Oswald was told not to contact Ruth Paine, her only real friend in the U.S. Secret Service advised her not to do that. She then elaborated on this by explaining they had told her it not look good if the public found out that Ruth had friends over here, and be bad for Marina if people found out the connection between her and Ruth and the CIA. So an assistant DA then prompted her, in other words, you were left with a distinct impression she was in some way connected to the CIA. Marina said, yes, that was true. Well, you might ask why this might be important. Well, the answer eventually became clear. Oswald was told about the depository job by Ruth Paine, and it's through her he is established in that location. And right after the parade route was finalized in Washington, Oswald was already in place in the depository. It's indeed plausible that the final plans for the motorcade that dawdled in front of the depository were determined by this very fact. Early November, Oswald was confused. He still thought he was involved in some kind of anti-Castro plot. Now, Oswald, it turns out, suffered from dyslexia and misspelled words peppered most of his handwritten messages. 2 weeks before the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald wrote to E. Howard Hunt, or some Mr. Hunt, asking for clarification concerning his position. Well, this letter surfaced anonymously in the mid-1970s, and has had conspiracists and the Warren Commission champions at each other's throats for over a generation. Well, handwriting experts couldn't decide that it wasn't Oswald that wrote it, nor could they affirm that it was. What is exceptional, though, is that Oswald's dyslexia is quite evident in that message, and therefore it persuades one to believe that it's more likely authentic. In the letter, Oswald wanted more information because any steps are taken by him or anybody else. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing in Cuba or with Cuba, or what was going to happen, if anything, about Cuba. He certainly wasn't talking about his position concerning the future assassination of President Kennedy, because he'd already applied for another job outside the depository. He apparently didn't like working there. He and Marina were having their second child. He needed more money, so he applied to the Texas Employment Division for a better job. An employment position at the airport, paying 30% more, was offered. That's $100 a month more. Texas employment officer called Ruth Paine's house twice to tell him about the offer, and Ruth apparently didn't pass on the messages. Well, we don't really know why she didn't tell Oswald about the job offer, but we do know that working in a depository is precisely what the conspirators wanted Oswald to do, and they wanted him to stay there. At the same time, it was no question he wasn't happy there and had no desire to stay. In reply to his letter concerning his position, and this is where even after 50 years we haven't hypothesized a great deal. E. Howard Hunt, or maybe David Atlee Phillips, or maybe somebody else, nobody's sure at this point, seems to have told Oswald that writing to the Soviet embassy in Washington about his desire to return to Russia would act as a good cover for the anti-Castro plans. So Oswald composed a letter to the Soviet embassy in Washington just 2 weeks before he was supposed to murder the president. Now, certainly that was incriminating and frankly stupid if he was actually a conspirator. Or maybe we should just look at it as convenient. In fact, this is the only letter that Oswald is said to have typed. Now, a lot of folks believe that letter was forged. Certainly the Soviets did. Others think it's legitimate. Some think it was dictated. Some of his regular spelling mistakes are evident in the typed version, of course. Whatever the case might be, in that letter, Oswald mentions he went to Mexico City. Mentions his desire to return to Russia. Talks about how he dislikes the U.S., about the notorious FBI, and throws in he visited Comrade Costin in Mexico City. Well, apparently Ruth Paine secretly copied the original letter that Oswald wrote. In the letter to the Soviet embassy in Washington, from an Oswald point of view, his pro-Soviet stance was supposed to deflect attention away from his coming anti-Castro activities. At least that was what he was thinking. But from the plotter's perspective, the letter was absolutely perfect. It forever incriminated Oswald in the assassination of the president. And in this typed oddity, Oswald refers to not using his real name. Shows clearly his desire to return to Russia, which calls into question his loyalties. The Soviets felt it was a forgery and intended to incriminate Russia in the assassination of President Kennedy. But to make sure it looked like a slam dunk, he says he had contact with a Soviet consular official when he visited Mexico City, who it turns out was a KGB officer, who just happened to be in charge of wet jobs and assassinations in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, frankly, how much better can it be as a way to incriminate Oswald as a pro-Soviet? Oswald didn't know that's what Kostokov's job was, of course, but the CIA did. And those who counseled him to write the letter, or actually wrote it for him, also knew. So Oswald incriminated himself and the Soviets in showing that he met with a Soviet assassination specialist in Mexico City shortly before the murder of the President of the United States. Mentioning Kostokov's name, and Oswald called him Costin, was critical to the plan to frame him for the killing of the president and simultaneously implicate the Soviets and Comrade Kostokov's assassination team. The implication is they all might have been involved in the assassination as well. What is curious about this letter is under interrogation, Oswald admits he wrote a letter to the Soviet embassy complaining about his treatment by the notorious FBI. But during that same interrogation, he says he was never in Mexico City, and the only city he ever visited in Mexico was Tijuana. Well, this is certainly bizarre because his letter begins with the mention of his visit to Mexico City. So he's both lying and telling the truth in the same breath. And with so many elements of this story, there are a lot of twists and turns that can drive a rational person out of his mind. Maybe Oswald's referring to previous letters he wrote to the Soviet embassy in Washington. Now, there are a few ways with which you can thread this needle. There's a book by FBI agent James Hosty, who had interviewed Marina Oswald, who in fact was the notorious FBI agent Oswald was complaining about in his letter. Hosty writes about the episode in his 2011 book entitled Assignment Oswald and his discussion with his superior, Gordon Shanklin. He said, I then examined again the draft letter Ruth had given me during our interview. This was the draft in which Oswald later typed his final letter to the Soviet embassy in Washington about his Mexico City trip. In it, Oswald referred to his meeting with Comrade Costin, talked about the notorious FBI agent Hasty harassing his wife. Thought it was a good idea to ask Shanklin if he could attach it to my report or if I should make a separate piece of evidence. So I walked into Shanklin's office and waved a letter in front of him, asked him what he thought would be the best way to handle it. He lunged to his feet, looked as if he was going to jump over his desk and strangle Ashton. Said, I told you to get rid of that damn Oswald note. Get rid of it now. For God's sakes, just do what I tell you and get rid of it now. Appeared to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Later on, Hosty mentioned FBI agent Bardwell Odom. Talks again about the copy of the letter Ruth Payne made. He said, when I reported back to Shanklin Saturday night and told him I had a copy of this letter, he hit the roof. He yelled and said, I thought I told Hosty to get rid of that letter. Well, why destroy evidence? I mean, that order was given by a senior FBI official. It's completely possible Oswald was lying under interrogation, admitting he wrote to the embassy and yet lying about ever going to Mexico City. But it also is possible the letter Oswald thinks he wrote to the Soviet embassy was not the same one as the letter that actually was received by him. And the Ruth Payne copy was different from the type letter that so deeply incriminated him. And the fact that innocent Good Samaritan Ruth decided to surreptitiously, can't talk, make a handwritten copy to his letter, a copy that later disappeared, and the FBI's Gordon Shanklin became apoplectic about it to be destroyed immediately, does not inspire confidence in the Warren Commission version of these events. In 1990, Boris Yeltsin gave President Clinton a copy of the letter, attached with the comments of Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, who said, one gets the definite impression that the letter was concocted by those who, judging from everything, were involved in the president's assassination, which certainly raised a lot of questions. Well, in Dallas, the presidential procession was actually choreographed so it would slow to a crawl as it passed the depository. Sheriff Bill Decker made the unprecedented decision of having over 100 of his police officers stand down from the protection of the motorcade, which raises the question of why he so reduced protection of the president. That question certainly deserves to be examined. It's been alleged that General Charles Cabell, a very close associate of Allen Dulles, both of whom had been fired from the CIA by JFK, along with Cabell's brother Earl, who was the mayor of Dallas, may have influenced these decisions. That issue, of course, is still shrouded in mystery, but numerous sources allege that either or both of the Cabell brothers may have been involved in these suspicious and fatal decisions. To have the officers stand down and or have the motorcade slow to a crawl in front of the depository. Well, General Charles Cabell believed JFK was a traitor to this country. We don't know quite how strongly Earl shared those feelings, but we do know it's between 100 and 125 police officers were called off any duties of protecting the motorcade. In Dealey Plaza, each of the assassins was dressed in a suit masquerading as a Secret Service agent while carrying phony identification badges supplied by a man named Chauncey Holt. And after the assassination, 3 tramps were arrested and then let go. Your speculation abounded about who these tramps were. One author has argued, rather convincingly apparently, that one of the tramps was E. Howard Hunt. Since then, a YouTube interview of Chauncey Holt reveals that he indeed was one of the tramps as well. His mission, he said, was to bring phony Secret Service badges to Dallas. He didn't know why he was doing it, but he did as he was told. Well, Chicago mafiosi James Files and Charles Nicoletti, who are actually the minions who said they gunned the president down November 22nd. Another figure, Eugene Hale Brady, a man who had connections to many of the principals in this particular plot. The Vice President Johnson, the mob, the CIA, and anti-Castro Cubans was not known about until 1969. He was a criminal with 33 prior arrests who was momentarily detained in a Daltex building and then released. Since that point in time, researchers have pieced together his role and function in Dallas. A review of his extensive connections to the conspiracy is provided in a book called Conspiracy in Camelot. It seems Brady was instrumental in getting Nicoletti and John Roselli into Daltex building. That was his primary function. Well, at curtain time, so to speak, Chauncey Holt provides phony Secret Service badges. Brady gets 2 assassins into the Daltex building. Bill Decker calls off police protection. The CIA's David Atlee Phillips choreographs the events in Dealey Plaza. And the American tragedy begins to unfold at precisely 12:30 in the afternoon. For the Daltex building, Nicoletti shoots the president in the throat. Roselli was apparently too skittish to fire at the man. James Files, using a Remington fireball from his perch on the grassy knoll, fires the bullet that actually killed the president. His frontal shot blew out a huge exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head. Mac Wallace was the shooter in the depository window who left the incriminating shells in the sniper's lair on the 6th floor. Unfortunately, in his haste to remove himself, he also left one telltale fingerprint. James Worrell spotted the man hurriedly leaving the building in a suit coat. Well, Mac Wallace was a hitman who a lot of conspiracy authors allege was Lyndon Johnson's personal assassin. His role in at least one prior murder is well documented. Now, other researchers, of course, believe it was not Wallace, but the CIA's David Morales in the depository window. Since all the assassins were dressed as Secret Service agents wearing suits with their ever-present ID badges, they had little difficulty leaving the area. You need to remember that most of the sheriff's deputies have been told to stand down throughout the motorcade. So that made exiting the scene remarkably easy. One witness said it took between 12 and 15 minutes before the area of the shooting started to be secured by police. Files and Nicoletti and Roselli merely drove their car out of the area. Wallace scurried out of the depository unseen except by Worrell. Dallas Police Lieutenant Jack Revelle reported after the assassination he escorted Mayor Cabell on a flight to Washington, D.C., where they gathered in the house of the mayor's brother. Revelle recalls on the day of the JFK's funeral, Cabell's house was filled with high-profile people and three-star generals who watched the funeral on television in an upbeat atmosphere. Well, throughout the assassination period, Oswald was eating his lunch on the 2nd floor of the depository in the break room. He didn't watch the motorcade, but rapidly became paranoid that he had been set up after Officer Marion Baker dashed into the building. Within 90 seconds of the final shot being fired, Officer Baker charged into the depository with his gun drawn. Saw Oswald on the 2nd floor, either buying a Coke or already calmly drinking one. And after confronting Oswald, he scurried up to the 6th floor to look for the sniper. Well, of course, Oswald became paranoid at this point in time, as if, at long last, he finally figured out exactly what was going on and what he was involved in. He left the depository, took a cab beyond his rooming house, walked back, changed clothes, grabbed his revolver. Seems he was told regarding his Cuban commission if anything went wrong, he was to go down to the Texas theater, so that's where he headed. In fact, he was carrying a loaded revolver. Does show he was wary about something was not what it was supposed to be. And even though he had $13 in his pocket, he snuck into the movie theater without buying a ticket. Gary Marlowe, a mafia hitman and a close associate and friend of James Files, was assigned to kill Oswald at the theater. But Officer J.D. Tippett actually disturbed these plans by stopping Mr. Marlowe. Unlike Oswald, never killed anybody in his life, assassin Marlowe murdered Tippett on the spot, pumping 3 bullets into his body and one directly into his temple execution style. In fact, it's questionable whether Tippett even had time to draw his gun. At the time Tippett was being shot, Oswald was eating popcorn in the Texas theater. Spent more than 30 minutes sitting next to the person and started looking for the contact who never arrived. The theater had a capacity of 900 people, only had 20 in it at that point in time. Oswald sat down next to one man and started a conversation, only to have that man move away. He then sat down next to a pregnant woman and also tried to make contact. That woman also got up and left the theater. He was obviously trying to find somebody he expected to meet there. Suddenly, in dashed the police, and Oswald was arrested after a scuffle. When his wife visited him in jail, he told her that they hadn't been beating him, they were treating him fine. You don't have to worry about that. Did you bring June and Rachel? Of course, we can speak with about absolutely anything at all. It's a mistake. I'm not guilty. There are people who are going to try to help me. There's a lawyer in New York on whom I'm counting for help. He said, there's nothing to cry about. Try not to think about it. Everything is going to be all right. If they ask you anything, you have a right not to answer. You have the right to refuse to talk. You're not to worry. You have friends. They'll help you. If it comes to that, you can ask the head Red Cross for help. Kiss the kids for me, and I love you, and be sure to buy shoes for June. With Oswald being interviewed by police, evidence starts accumulating. The cabal's cover story may not hold up to scrutiny. Oswald, for example, actually liked Kennedy. He seemed to have cooled on his interest in Soviet-style Marxism, said he'd never been to Mexico other than to Tijuana, and he generally worked on the 1st floor of the depository, not the 6th. When asked if he wanted to shield his face, he said, why should I hide my face? I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. Well, Oswald's behavior was simply not conforming to the propaganda that was being prepared for him. Under questioning, he said, "I'm not malcontent. Nothing irritated me about the president. John Kennedy had a nice family. Even his supposed infatuation with the Soviet Union seemed to be eroding. He said, the way you're treating me, I might as well be in Russia." Well, such talk didn't square with the rabid pro-Cuban, pro-Soviet, pro-communist image the conspirators meticulously worked so hard to create about Oswald. And more importantly, while in jail, he attempted to place a long-distance phone call to John Hurt in Raleigh, North Carolina. This might have exposed that Oswald had a prior relationship with government entities. Well, he made 2 attempts to call the mysterious Hurt, but never got through to him. Researchers later determined that John Hurt was connected to military intelligence in North Carolina, may have been one of Oswald's original contacts in his apparent phony defection to the Soviet Union years before. A lot of folks argue Oswald never defected at all, but was an American plant who entered the Soviet Union to develop better intelligence for the U.S. Further such plants in the USSR were unearthed since that time. With his attempted phone calls and all other statements he was making, a giant game of hardscrabble confronted the plotters. Therefore, it became urgent that they silence him. With Marlowe's failure to take out Oswald, Jack Ruby was tasked with the assignment, and he followed his orders to the letter. Less than 48 hours after Oswald's arrest in a Texas theater, Lee Harvey Oswald was dead. The Warren Commission said Jack Ruby had no underworld connections. Didn't take long to research Stoner and Ruby's about as connected to the mob as anybody could be. He was a courier for Al Capone. His rap sheet showed 9 prior arrests. He was cheek to jowl with Jimmy Hoffa's attorney, made myriad long-distance calls to mobsters in 3 months prior to the assassination. Indeed, Robert Kennedy said after reviewing Ruby's long-distance call record that Ruby called the same people as the individuals Kennedy himself investigated when he held hearings on the Mafia's head of the Rackets Committee. Despite this consummately overwhelming evidence, the Warren Commission whitewashed it all. Said Ruby was merely a nightclub owner living in Dallas. After he was incarcerated, his first visit was mafioso Joseph Campisi, who told Ruby he'd be properly taken care of. After months in jail, though, Ruby was convinced he was betrayed and started bellowing that the LBJ was behind the murder of President Kennedy. According to one of Ruby's statements, you have to realize the people here want everybody to think I'm crazy. Isn't it strange Oswald should be fortunate enough to get a job at the Texas School Book Depository 2 weeks before? Only one person could have had that information, and that man was Johnson, because he's the one that was going to arrange the trip. The only one who gained by the shooting. Nobody really wanted to listen to Ruby, except Dorothy Kilgallen. She was a well-known television personality and a gossip columnist. She took an interest in Ruby and secretly managed to get interviews with him. And what she later told her editor, she was going to blow the lid off the Kennedy assassination with her upcoming revelations. Well, not surprisingly, she died mysteriously, allegedly by an overdose of sleeping pills. And so did her best friend, Ms. Earl Smith, within days of Ms. Kilgallen. Kilgallen had actually given a copy of her notes to Ms. Smith to hold for her. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll talk more about the Kennedy assassination tomorrow. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.